This happened when I was around 12 years old. Me and my family lived in a small apartment, but it felt cozy to me, and we knew some of our neighbors and would sometimes even invite them to our house. They were great people. At the time, I used to sleep next to my brother's bed, and felt safe with his presence, like nothing bad would happen to me. The only thing I can say was bad about the apartment was that our bedroom was next to the bedroom of our neighbor, which was a little higher than ours. If you wanted to see their room, you could do so by getting on top of a chair, while they could see almost our entire bedroom with no effort. Despite it being freaky, I didn't think much about it, since, like I said, I had my brother sleeping in the same room and felt like nothing could go wrong. Oh, how innocent I was. The day everything started, I had barely finished my dinner and decided that I would go to sleep early, so my brother was not in the room at the moment. Everything seemed fine, until I woke up and saw something that still gives me chills to this day. What I saw was a silhouette of a person right next to the window, and while I could not see their face at all, I knew they were staring at me. I remember screaming as loud as I could and running desperately to the living room, where my mom was watching TV. I explained what happened to her, and she didn't seem bothered at all. She was like, "Oh, okay," and continued watching TV like nothing happened. A few days after that event, I was feeling way better about it, but even then, I decided to keep the curtains closed, just in case. Until one day I woke up in the middle of the night and for some reason, had the idea of opening the curtains. And as you already expected, she was there staring at me once again, and like the first time, I couldn't see her face at all, just a black figure. I don't know how many times she did that, but for the following days I would wake up like 2 to 3 times every night, and while the curtains were always closed, I would have this feeling that she was there, watching me sleep. A few days later I decided to tell my parents everything, and that's when things get creepier. They said that right next to our apartment lived an elderly woman who was sick and had her son taking care of her. They said that they would leave to take out the trash, and she would sneak behind them and smile, while patiently waiting for them to turn around. I tried telling them how I felt paranoid she was always watching me, and they said something like, "She's a sick old lady, scaring people is probably the only highlight of her week. Just ignore her and keep sleeping." While nowadays I don't care much about that, I remember being very angry with them. Why weren't they helping me? I did exactly as they said, and just ignored her every night, while keeping the curtains closed. It took some time, but I was finally starting to forget about the experience, until a few weeks later. That's when things took a turn for the worse. From my mother's perspective, our family was always different from others. My mom was the one working all day while my dad would be at home with us, so he would always bring me and my brother to school and then go pick us out when it ended. One day I was at school waiting for my dad to arrive when a friend came up to me and said she could bring me home with her dad's car. I completely forgot my father was coming to get me, so I said yes and went inside. When I got back home I knocked at the door, but other than my 2 dogs barking, there was no response. I started to get anxious, so I kept knocking over and over, until I heard a big sound coming from the old woman's apartment, and that's when I realized I had made a big mistake. As soon as I heard the sound I ran to the elevator and clicked the buttons as many times as I could. Our elevator had a window at the center, so I was terrified she would show up in it, but thankfully she didn't. After I left the building I decided to lay down on the street, trying to process what had happened, when my friend saw me and invited me to their house. I was watching cartoons while her dad was calling mine, explaining why I was not at school. When my dad came back, I ran to him and gave him a big hug while crying, and he said, "It's okay now." My brother's class usually ended 30 minutes after mine, so we had to go back to school and get him. The entire time I was expecting my father to scold me, but instead he was very calm and told me he was thinking of buying a cell phone, so I could message him if anything happened. After that experience I was even more terrified of the old woman, but kept the curtains closed like usual, and kind of got used to it. Eventually, we moved to a different house, and I never saw that woman again. Not that I would be able to recognize her, since every time I saw her at the window her face was completely black. And that's how my story ends. Thankfully I didn't get to see how she looked like, but I realized my story was not as interesting as some others that I have read. In any case, I hope you enjoyed it, and sorry if some things don't make sense. English isn't my first language. the man with a ladder and bad intentions. When I was a senior in college a few years ago, I lived in an old house about a 5-minute walk from my campus with 5 of my girlfriends. It was still COVID times, so we spent a lot of time just in the house since we could not really go elsewhere. To preface, this house was old, and many of the windows didn't lock. Our landlord sucked, as many college ones do, and did not do anything to fix this issue, but with it being 6 of us and often a boyfriend or 2 sleeping in the house, it felt mostly safe and many of us would keep our windows open. Our college was in a town just outside of the second most dangerous city in the state, but right around the campus it felt relatively safe. When the weather started getting warmer in early spring, we would sit out on the roof to sunbathe, and this roof faced our street. We would access the roof from my roommate's, let's call her Mary, bedroom window on the 2nd floor since it led straight to the roof. Our street was residential and did not get a ton of traffic, but we did have a couple encounters of younger guys catcalling us as they drove by, but nothing seemed sinister, as we were college kids. One night, late in the semester, Mary went up to her room to call her brother while the rest of us were hanging downstairs. That's when she rushed downstairs and said she saw a ladder leading up to the roof where we would all sunbathe, and right near her window, which was open. Later, we learned she said out loud to her brother what she saw before she came down. When she told us this, my other roommate and her boyfriend ran outside to find a man running away from our house with the freaking ladder, who we assume heard Mary telling her brother she saw the ladder and knew he was caught. It was dark, so they could not make out anything about him. I immediately texted our landlord asking if he had someone come by the house to do any work, and he said no. We then called the police, who came by. They did some investigating and patrolled our house for a couple nights, but we never found out who the man was, what his intentions were, or if he had been there before. So, to the creep with the ladder, let's not meet. My dog alerted me to something at my window. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this, and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help wake me up. One night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop, but I then realized he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand on. All I could see in the window was the reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended to just realize it was empty. I turned on the lamp and acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room, and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anything was out there. I went back to my room and told myself I was just seeing things. I closed the blinds and turned off the lamp and got some sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. It was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs had burned out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, let's not meet.